Welcome back, my friends, to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. Each week, I'm sharing stories from my path and using the power of conversation and collaboration with my many great guests. Together, we chart a course toward understanding, bridging divides, and fostering a community where wisdom prevails over discord. Friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. The only good thing about a bad attitude is we have the ability as individuals to change it. For me, it starts with gratitude and personal accountability. I am so incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Please remember to subscribe and share the DTH podcast with your network of friends. If you would like to support the show, check out the Support Us page on the D-Rate the Hate website. With that, my friends, let's get to it. Friends, in yet another thought-provoking DTH conversation, I am joined this week by my friend and New York Times columnist David Brooks to discuss the pressing issue of societal disconnection and its profound repercussions. Through a lens of empathy and insight, David examines the alarming rise of loneliness, sadness, and hostility permeating modern communities. Within David's book, How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen, he explores the intricate web of factors contributing to this disconnection. In this incredible conversation, we just scratched the surface on many things. To name a few, the stark rural-urban divide and this pervasive feeling that many have of invisibility. Our conversation shines a light on the damaging effects of siloing and othering, which fuel the divisive us versus them mentality plaguing society in so many ways. One of the many great takeaways within this powerful conversation is David underscoring the transformative power of storytelling in bridging divides and fostering empathy. Friends, stick around for another incredible DTH conversation with my friend David Brooks. You're not going to want to miss it. Here we go. David Brooks, thank you for joining me on the D-Rate the Hate podcast. Man, it's so great to see you.
Oh, it's good to be with you, Wilk. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this, since our first conversation, David. It, like I was telling you then, and I just this book of yours, How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing People Deeply and Being Deeply Seen, is one that I rank among the top books of all time. I mean, as far as what people need to know to be good people, one of the biggest issues that we see today is people just not engaging in the right kind of conversations, not actually listening to or deeply seeing the people that they're in conversation with. So this is one of those books, David, that has just stood out to me as an incredibly important one. So to start our conversation, David, could you just tell me at what point was it, or when did you first begin to realize that this not seeing others and not being seen was one of these great social ills that we suffer from?
Yeah, well, like all writers, I'm working out my stuff in public. And so I had a problem of not being a great connector myself. I tend to be a little up in my head, a little cerebral, and a little emotionally aloof. So I wanted to learn the skills myself of how to be a great conversationalist. How do you break off a conversation gracefully so the other person feels honored? I remember my fifth high school reunion. I go there, and my only way to get out of a conversation was to say, "Oh, I'm going to the bar to get another drink." And so I'm like 20 minutes into that conversation, into that reunion, and I'm so drunk I have to leave because I've gone to the bar like 4 or 5 times in 20 minutes. So I wanted to get better myself. But at the same time, we've got a country where people are lonely, people are sad, and people are mean. And there's a whole bunch of statistics I could give you. You probably know a bunch of them: a rise of suicide, rise in depression, rise of what they call deaths of despair. And some of the statistics are just freaky to me. The number of people who say they have no close friends is 54% of Americans. The number of people who say no one knows me well, that's up by fourfold. The number of people not in a romantic relationship is up by a third. The number of people who are rank themselves in the lowest happiness category, that's up by 50%. And so we've just become sadder and meaner. And when you become sad and lonely and threatened, you want to lash out. You feel it's injustice that people aren't giving you the dignity you deserve, which it is. And so you begin to perceive threat. And so as I'm in my work as a journalist, I travel the country pretty much constantly. And I found so many people felt unseen. And so I'd go to the Midwest, for example. And it used to be I'd go to the Midwest and about once a day, somebody would say to me, for you guys, we're just flyover country. And then I began to hear that like 7 or 8 times a day. And it felt like Republicans and Democrats were staring at each other in blind incomprehension. And so we just had to get a lot better at seeing across differences and learning how to have skillful conversations, even when we disagree about really important stuff.
No, that's absolutely right. And that's one of the things in the book, David, that really just coincided so well with some of the things that I do. And it really brought to light a lot of things that I hadn't really thought about. But one of the things is this, I think you call it in the book, like this epidemic of blindness. And when once a person, kind of going back to that thing you're talking about, lonely, sad, and mean, once that person becomes or starts to feel invisible, when they feel like they are no longer important or nothing that they say matters, quite often we see they just begin to lash out, right? It turns into anger. And that's one of those things. So dive into that a little bit more. What is it about that invisibleness, if that's even a word, but when that person just, well, like you said, fly over country and how we don't feel seen, let's say me here in the Midwest in Minnesota, don't feel seen by the coastal elites or the intellectual elites, rural urban divide. One of the other things that I talk a lot about and do a lot of work with Braver Angels on is that rural urban divide. Talk about how that divide tends to make people feel invisible and then how that manifests itself.
Yeah, I mean, think of how we evolved. We evolved to live in bands of like 150 people, kind of like ourselves. And we only felt safe when we knew everyone else was looking after us. And so we're just wired to know when we're feeling invisible because suddenly we're under threat because we don't have our people hanging out and protecting us. So I think it yields this sense of anxiety and pain. And at the most extreme cases, every time I read a story about one of these mass shooters and I read about what kind of young man the guy is, he's invisible at school. Like nobody even notices him. And the teachers have no memory of him. And he's just like, the girls don't date him. And there was one guy who was caught as he was beginning a mass shooting. And somebody did a magazine profile of the guy. And he said, when I started, I didn't even want to do it. But if somebody had just noticed me and said, we're on your side, I would have stopped. And so I think it's that extreme form of loneliness leads to just lashing out anger and violence. And then as for the social divisions you described, I think in my business, the media, we have a lot to blame. When I started, I was a police reporter in Chicago. I'm covering murders and rapes and crimes in Chicago. And when I was there, and this was in the 80s, late 80s, there were a bunch of crusty old guys who I worked with who hadn't gone to college. Journalism in those days was a working class profession. You didn't have to go to college to get a job at the Chicago Tribune or Chicago Sun-Times in those days. But now, not only do you have to go to college, you have to go to an elite college. And so 50% of the people who work at my newspaper, the New York Times, or our rival, the Wall Street Journal, they've gone to the same 26 elite schools. Mm-hmm. So we're just hiring from a very tiny sliver of the American population. And so if you tell people your voices aren't worth hearing, well, of course they're going to get angry. And that's one of the things that I fault my own industry for, that we've done a lot of that. And then I teach you to prove what an elitist I am. I've taught for 20 years at Yale. I always say I only teach at schools I couldn't have gone into Uh, and I had a few kids from rural America over those 20 years, a few students, but not many. And most of them were like from the Upper East Side of Manhattan or the Upper West Side of Manhattan. That was diversity. And so it's just become this system of replicating inherited affluence and privilege and certain social connections.
Right. Right. No, and that leads me to, I know you quoted in the book a few times our friend Monica Guzman and the work that she did and the stuff that she talks about in her book. I never thought of it that way. And that really reminds me of that siloing thing, right? The siloing and othering and things. If you find yourself in a silo of people who all think alike, and then now you just end up in this echo chamber, this bubble, and you really start to it really lends itself to that concept of us versus them. And then after a while, the ignorance of them becomes so strong that ignorance turns into fear, and we just completely cut each other off. And once we cut each other off, that's where that fear starts to turn into anger, and that anger turns into violence. It's just a really ugly thing.
Yeah, one of the things that happens is called self-polarization. If you hang around people like yourself, not only do you all share the same views, but you all develop more extreme versions of your own views. And so it becomes self-polarizing. And then you do a thing I mentioned in the book called stacking. And that's where I learn one fact about you, and therefore I make a whole bunch of other assumptions about you. And so I learn, so-and-so voted for Trump, therefore so-and-so must drive a pickup truck. So-and-so must, whatever. And nobody fits the stereotypes. Like I heard about a lady who's a ardent Trump supporter, and she's a lesbian biker who converted to Sufi Islam after surviving a plane crash. And I'm like, what stereotype does she fit into? Like most of us don't fit into our stereotypes. And then, frankly, in some of the circles I travel in where people are theorizing why people are voting for Donald Trump, they never use a proper name. It's never my friend Sam voted for Trump because it's like they never met a person who voted for Donald Trump, like 50% of America. And they make all these generalizations. And one of the things I've become, and I've been guilty of it myself, of psychoanalyzing why people, it's not like they disagree. Like I have a close loved one in my family who's really loves Donald Trump, and he does it for policy reasons. He likes the immigration policy better. He likes the trade policy better. He thinks he's a more effective manager. I mean, it's not mystery why some people follow certain politicians because they think they have better policies. And so we psychologize when we could just look at the polls, and you look at Americans right now. Who do you trust in the economy? Well, Trump has a 20 percentage point advantage. Who do you trust on immigration? Trump has like an infinite point per advantage. Who do you think is a better manager, Trump or Biden? But Trump has a 12 percentage point advantage. So you don't have to psychologize people. You just look at where they stand on the issues. Right.
And I think that really goes to the point, David, that, with so many of these things, right? I call it, whether you call it identity politics or identitarianism or however you want to put it. When you talk about that stacking thing and people just grabbing on to one particular thing about a person, as soon as they realize that this person is for Trump, everything else becomes irrelevant about that person, right? And once they become, everything else becomes irrelevant. Now all of a sudden it's just some outrage machine that's running around in a big jacked up pickup truck with Trump flags flying off the back end and everything else, but they forget about all the people like your friend, right, that you're talking about, the immigration policy, the trade policy, the different things that he was able to do for the economy, or you got somebody like me who I'm not gonna lie, I voted for Trump twice, and not that I want to vote for him again, but I there's no way I could ever vote for somebody who ascribes to the policies of, let's say, the Biden-Harris administration, right? So while I don't like Trump and what he does as a person or the way that he presents himself or the way that he treats other people or whatever, it's purely a policy thing. But I get lumped into that MAGA class that, like a Hakeem Jeffries and a Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are always talking about, because everybody that would even give the idea of voting for Trump the time of day is now MAGA and is being demonized by that side. And I think that identitarianism and the fact that we're forced into groups and everything else about us as a human being is taken away and they focus on that one thing is one of the real dangers that we face in this country. And it's certainly not exclusive to one side or the other. Now I see it a lot more on both sides now than I ever did before, but talk about that shift that we've seen since we're talking about Trump. Talk about that shift that we've seen in say the conservative side of politics over the past 6, 8, 10, 12 years.
Yeah, well, it's been quite remarkable. I grew up, my mentor was a guy named Bill Buckley. He was the most prominent conservative columnist in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And then I went to work for a whole series of conservative publications. I worked for the Washington Times, which is a conservative newspaper in D.C. I worked for National Review. I worked for the Wall Street Journal editorial page. I worked for the Weekly Standard. I ran the gamut of right to further right. Our movement back then was a mixture of two things. It was free market libertarians, just get the government off my back and let me have a business or whatever. That was one group of people. And then there was a second group, which is more social conservatives. They're pro-life, but mostly they would believe in traditional values, bourgeois values of how we organize our society. And that's, I guess there was a third group, which would have been my group, which we were called the neoconservatives. And when I called myself a neoconservative, what I meant by it was we were liberals who thought liberal social policies were not working. And so when I was a reporter in Chicago, I covered housing projects that were built with the best of intentions. But these people had no idea how to build a housing project where people would be able to live nicely with each other, because they tore down all the neighborhoods and they put up these big high rises. But when they tore down the neighborhoods, they took away all the arrangements people had made to look out for each other. And when they put up the high rises, all those social arrangements were gone and the gangs just took over. And so I was a sort of a disillusioned leftist. And so that was a certain set of schools. But when Trump comes in, it's more populist, and it's very different than the ideas that I ascribe to. And it was more, we're in a struggle against the coastal elites. And that would have never worked for me because I am a coastal elite. So
now you're just beating yourself up.
I'm a self-hating coastal elite. And so, I was having lunch. I was covering a senator from, I shouldn't say where, from the South. And he was going up for re-election. And he says to me, I look out over my crowds. I don't know any of these people. Like, Trump brought in a whole group of new people that were never been Republican. And most of them were working class and they were more rural. And the Republican Party switched in a very short period of time from being the party of the country club elite to the party of the working class. And not only the Republican Party, the British Labour Party, all the conservative parties in the Western world made this switch. And it's just such a dramatic thing. It's still mind-boggling to me. And, I was ardently for the Iraq War because I thought I watched democracy spread around the world. I thought the Middle East needs democracy, and it turned out it didn't work. But I'm still very supportive of our aid to Ukraine. But President Trump is not, and a lot of Republicans are not. So just the idea that Reagan's aggressive foreign policy, the party's gone 180 degrees away from that. It's still remarkable to me that political parties can change 180 degrees on some issues within a very short time.
Yeah, it is pretty wild how that's happened. And one of the things, David, you can tell me what your thoughts on this are, but one of the things that I've seen over the past 10, 12 years is all these people. You talked about the rural workers or people that out in your friend's crowd there, people he's seeing that are like, where did these people come from? How did these people, why how did this happen? I looked at this thing, and one of the things that I started to see, and then, when I started getting involved with Braver Angels and doing more of the depolarization work that I do now and things. And one of the things that really started to come to light for me was when I was looking out, or when I was having these conversations with these different people, was all of these people who for the longest time, didn't want anything to do with politics. I mean, I was one of those people for the longest time. And I didn't even start paying attention in any way, shape, or form to politics until I started seeing some of the stuff that Barack Obama was doing after he got into office. And then I started getting mad. And I kind of combined my own experience with what I was seeing out amongst everybody else. And all of these people that wanted nothing to do with politics. They didn't even vote. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't watch the news. They didn't do anything, but they did not get involved. They did not engage until they became enraged. And that is one of these things that I know you talk a little bit about, is how we, and maybe more so in with some of the other authors that I've been reading today, but it's certainly one of these big things where people begin to allow their emotions to really start to work in different ways that they probably never allowed them to do before. And then now that, I don't think personally, it's one of the things that I've talked about quite so often, is now never allow your emotions to dictate your actions. But we've kind of seen this deal now where there's this whole, we're seeing record numbers of people coming out to vote, right, on both sides, but they're not voting necessarily for the right reasons. They're voting because they hate Trump, or they're voting because they hate Biden. They're not really looking at the true policy issues, or really diving into what is really going on within the administration. They're going based on sound bites and tweets and whatnot. So talk a little bit about that, how people have allowed themselves to be overtaken by emotion because of sound bites, headlines, and things like that.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it is just, my kind of people do this. So, a lot of thinking is for belonging. It's not for truth seeking. And so we say the things that'll help us belong. And so if you're on an Ivy League campus, you better not vote for Trump, because you will not belong. And similarly, you're at probably most Southern Baptist churches in Georgia or Mississippi. You better be for Trump, or else you won't really belong. And so there's a lot of that going on. So it becomes identity. It's just like, who your identity. Can I ask you, was there a certain set of policies that Obama that got you enraged, or was it just a dribble of things that you thought, just, this guy's bad for the country, I need something else?
So it was a dribble of things. When I saw the apology tour, and I will admit to you that I was one that really started to get sucked into a lot of the talk radio stuff and become, more and more aggravated based on, kind of like that. Something I speak out against so much now is the fear, outrage, and grievance model, right? Yeah. Where your outrage entrepreneurs and your grievance grifters are, now when I started paying attention to politics, I wasn't even on Twitter until a couple of years ago, stuff like that. So it wasn't so much that part of it. But when I was driving a truck, and I think I told you about that in our first conversation, I used to spend, weeks, if not months on end in a truck. So I was listening to the radio 14 hours a day. And I didn't listen to music radio. I listened to talk radio 14 hours a day. But there were several things within the policy perspective that I really didn't like, because as I saw it, the government was becoming more and more involved in our personal lives, diving, further and further into our individual liberty. With the Affordable Care Act, for instance, that was one that really drove me nuts. I wrote something a number of years back now, obviously, but on that thing, they put the Obama administration put out a thing called The Life of Julia, where they walk step through the life of Julia. and throughout the whole thing, I don't think they mentioned a father or her parents or anything, but how the government could take care of her, stage by stage throughout her life. And that was just the perception I got from those Obama years was, anti-police and we've got all that different stuff just kept me angry for the longest time. And then, I remember when the 2016 election came up, David, and my only choices were Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, right? Mm. And I'm like, I just spent 8 years enraged because of the stuff that was going on and the ugly that I was seeing from the Obama administration. And now these are my two choices. So now I'm really pissed. I'm at my deer camp up north. I drove back 2 hours just to come back down and vote. I come down, I vote, hold my nose, vote for Donald Trump, go back up to my deer camp with a whole bunch of booze and just just sat there all night, just screaming at the radio. I mean, that's just a point of personal privilege from my podcast here, just to throw that story out there. But it was one of the worst days of my entire life, and it should have never been, because I try not to let politics invade my personal life like that. But I remember the anxiety and the booze, and then worse yet, I remember the hangover the next day. Didn't get any hunting done that week, I don't think, but I definitely drank a lot. Yeah,
and one of the things I've learned as a way to depolarize is when I talk to people, I try to get them to tell me stories, to get storytelling questions. So like now as a journalist, I never ask people, "What do you think about this?" I try to ask, "How did you come to believe that?" Yeah. And so you get a much more interesting view of the person, because you learn about their influences or who shaped their values, stuff like that. And I think I tell this story in the book where I'm with a guy. This must have been like 2017 in South Dakota, where I'm going back tomorrow. And he's old. He's probably 72 or 73. And he says, "Let me tell you why I'm supporting Donald Trump." He said, "Listen, let me tell you about the best day of my life." And he's supervising a section of a plant that makes casings for refrigeration units. And they lay him off because they've replaced the technology in the plant. He's no longer qualified to lead people there. And so he thinks he's just going to leave quietly. And so he packs up his stuff in a box, and I guess they gave him a little office, and he opens the office door. And there are 3,600 people forming a double line from his office door in the plant to out through the parking lot to his car door in the parking lot. And so he walks through this double line as they applaud the whole way. And he said, "That was the best day of my life. All those people appreciating me, showing respect and thanking me for the job I'd done." And then he said, "Every job I've had since then was low pay, less good, more precarious." And so the guy says, and plus I've got to hang around my mother-in-law all the time because she's very ill, and we can't travel, we can't go out, we can't go out to dinner. And so he says, "That Donald Trump guy may be a jackass, but I need to change." And so when somebody tells you a story like that, you think, "Oh, I get where you're coming from. You got valid reasons."
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that I like so much about your book, David, is the stories that you brought. Not only the personal vulnerabilities from your own life that you brought into this, but then talking about the different people and the different real life experiences that people had, and how, I mean, that story, I got goosebumps right now just thinking about that story about, how this was losing his job ends up being the best day of his life, just seeing how many people cared about him and how many people he's impacted. But then, the sadness that goes along with that, because that's every day, everything progressively throughout his life has gotten worse. But the real point of that, and I think the thing that you make such a great point with that is people wanted a change. The trajectory with which we were, seeing things. I mean, another thing that I think about is how many people. I'm lucky enough right now in my life to be able to provide for my family on my income, and we live a very humble lifestyle, but that's what we've chosen to do. But I look out around me, and I look out around our country and different conversations that I've had with people, And that's not a reality for most people anymore. They are not able to get by on one income. They're not able to do, what for the longest time people were able to do. Just the small nuclear family, the maybe the husband goes to work, the wife stays home, takes care of the kids, take care of the home, things like that. When we think about what that meant for people for so long, and now it's just not a reality, and then they look at it, and you get somebody up there on the pedestal or the podium saying, "Oh yeah, things are going great, things are beautiful," but then you're paying $5 for a loaf of bread, and you're paying $3.50, $4 a gallon for gas, and you got the wife and the husband working, and you can barely get by, paying once you're done paying the mortgage, and trying to sit down at the end of the day at the table, and there's more bills left than money. I mean, how do you expect people not to get enraged, right?
Yeah, I'm just old enough. When I was a kid, I was aware of the inflation that we had back then, and it was like up to 18%. And I remember you're living in an era where A, your savings are getting eroded because the dollar's going to be worth less. But B, like, people are doing all these tricks, like they would charge things on their credit card in the first part of the month, and then they'd pay it off at the end of the month. And the dollar would have shifted, so you're making 5% or 5 or 10% because the value of the dollar's changed. But it's completely destabilizing. And if you're just hanging in there and suddenly gas shoots up from $3.19 or to $5.25, that just eats away at your whole sense of financial security. And so I understand why people are traumatized. I think in some parts of the country, I think the economy is good. I've been traveling, like I was in Eastern Ohio, Appalachian Ohio, and they've got an Intel plant coming in there, a chip making plant. I was up in Syracuse. They've got another plant. I was out in Dayton in Western Ohio, and they've got a lot of aerospace stuff coming in. And so they're one of the nice things that I think is happening is that the economy is producing jobs, but the inflation is still sucking away a lot of that. And so I'm hopeful it'll come down, but it just takes such a long time for inflation to come down. And it takes a long, long time for people to realize, okay, I can relax. Prices will not bite me in the ass.
Right.
But so people are still dealing with that and the aftershock of that inflationary spiral.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way to deny. I mean, there are jobs out there right now that are paying much better than they did before, but it seems like so many people, people that have been in their different positions for the longest time. When I think about the blue collar world, and I still think of myself as a blue collar guy. People with these, people have been in these jobs for a very long time, and they may get a 2 or 3% raise, year over year, or just they don't even get a COLA raise anymore, right? They just get the 2% or 3%. And then when you've got years where you got 9% inflation, it'd be nice if once things did come down, they brought the prices back down, but we don't see that. We don't see that very often, unfortunately. Yeah. So let's get back to another concept you talk about in the book, David. And it's like this moral formation and how we as a society in a lot of ways have kind of fallen away from the moral formation and what that has done to contribute to the problems that we're seeing in the country today. I mean, we can go right to one of the things we were talking about with Trump, right? And morality, and people look at his moral character. And I'm not using that necessarily as an example, but since we were talking about him before, but I think as a whole, we've seen a falling away of moral formation in this country. And what is that doing to us?
Yeah, well, I mentioned all those statistics of how sad and mean we are. And so like the just big social breakdown. And so people say, well, what's causing all this? Like, why should people have fewer friends than before? Like, that just seems weird. And I think you can tell a lot of different stories, some of which would be true. That one would be a technology story. Social media is driving us all crazy. We don't have friends because we're on their phones. And I think you can tell a sociology story that people used to be more active in community life. They went to church more. They went to synagogue, mosque, whatever. They were in the Kiwanis clubs. They were in the VFW or, any civic organization. I think you can tell an economic story. People are just economically strained. They don't have time. But the story I tell is, and I agree with all those stories, but the story I tell, which I think gets neglected, is the morality story, that we just don't treat each other with the kindness and consideration we deserve. And moral formation sounds like this big fancy thing, but it's really three different jobs. One, it's helping people find ways to restrain their natural selfishness. And that's like being in a community where you learn habits of self-control. And very few of us can do this on our own. But if you're in a community surrounded by people who say, don't drink all the time or whatever, you have some buffers to police your own natural selfishness and your inability to think in the long term. And then the second part of moral formation is helping people feel an ideal they can orient their lives around. It could be, I want to live like Jesus. Or it could be, I believe in science and reason. I want to lead a rational life. But it's some ideal that'll give your life purpose and direction. And it gives you strength. Nietzsche, the philosopher, said, he who has a why to live for can endure anyhow. If you know why you're living, what you're doing, struggling for, then you can endure the setbacks because you know what your goal is. Mm-hmm. And then the third part, which is really what this book is about, is being considerate to people in the concrete circumstances of life. Like, how do you host a dinner party so everybody feels included? How do you break up with somebody without crushing their heart? How do you sit with someone who's depressed? These are just basic skills. And you can learn these skills the way you can learn carpentry or tennis or anything else. And so in the book, I just try to walk people through the skills. When you're first meeting somebody, what do you do? When you're having a dinner conversation with somebody, how do you make it a great conversation? I have a chapter in there, my friend who suffered from depression ended up taking his life. How do you sit with someone who's going through that? And these are just basic skills. And I think we haven't taught these skills. I met a young woman who has had 4 boyfriends in her life. And at the end of each relationship, the boyfriend ghosted her. Instead of sitting her down and saying, I just don't think this is working, they just vanish. And so, of course, she thinks the next guy is going to do the same thing. And, of course, she has no trust because the life has not been trustworthy to her.
Sure.
And I think those guys behave in this awful way because they just don't know how to do it. And they don't know they really have a responsibility to do it. It's a decent thing to do. And so the book is really about trying to teach people basic moral skills of how to be considerate and kind in normal, complicated circumstances.
No, and I think that's so incredibly important, David. I mean, when I think about action items or how we can make the world a better place, I talk about start with each of us as individuals. And if we change our own life, we will in turn make the world a better place. These interpersonal skills, the ability to say the hard thing, I mean, everybody can work their way through the easy times, right? Mm. But it's the hard times, being able to, have that conversation with that young woman who, okay, well, we aren't clicking here. There's something that's not going to work. There's somebody that's going to be better for you. You may not think about it now, but, I mean, nobody likes to have that conversation, right? It's ugly. Right. It's not fun, but it's the right thing to do. And, one of the things that I say in each one of these episodes is, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything you've got. Excuse me. But the thing is just being kind is one of those things that far too many people just don't understand. They don't know how to do it anymore. And they will treat people in a way that they would never, ever want somebody to treat them. But it's just ugly. It's just ugly. So I know we're probably getting closer towards the end of our time here, David. One of the other things that I did want to talk to you about was that organization that you have called Weavers. Is that am I saying that correctly? Weavers. And we talked about it briefly in our last conversation, and that sounds like, this is one of those things that I just wish more people would take the time to look at our country as a whole, look at our humanity as a whole, and figure out ways to bring us together. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I do so much work with the organization Braver Angels. I know that there are tears in the fabric of our nation, It's very obvious, you know. And if we expect to, you know, leave a legacy of positivity in this world, we should be working to mend that fabric. So talk to me about that organization, David, Weavers, and what that is, and how, you know, how other people can get involved and do those kind of things.
Yeah, so I was writing all these columns, and it really occurred to me that underneath all the different problems I was writing about, whether it was polarization or the rise of suicide, or there was a fundamental root problem that caused all of them, and that was lack of social connection and lack of social trust. But it occurred to me this problem is being solved at the local level by people I call weavers. And so I started this organization called Weave, the Social Fabric Project. The website is, I think, weareweavers.org. And so what we did was we go into any cities and small towns around the country, and we say, who's trusted here? And people start giving us names, and very often they're the same names. You'll see the same name over and over. And these are people who are just active in their community. And some of them are not don't have an organization or official title. I ran to one woman who said, I practice aggressive friendship. So I'm the person in the neighborhood who invites people over. If we're going to have a July 4th thing, it's going to be me who hosts it. I just do that. And so that's a weaver. They just bring the neighborhood together. Others have more formal titles. There's a guy I ran into named Pancho Arguelles in Houston who takes guys who have been paralyzed after construction accidents, and he gives them wheelchairs. And he teaches them to be social workers. So you'll be in Houston and 25 guys in wheelchairs will wheel into your neighborhood to help you with your neighborhood's problems. And he's a beautiful guy. I once said to him, you radiate holiness. And he says to me, no, I reflect holiness, which is a good answer. And some of them are you wouldn't predict. Like there's a neighborhood in D.C. called Columbia Heights. And there's a guy who takes the money of the parking garage who has this obsession with city zoning regulations. And so if you have a problem with the city, you go to the guy in the parking garage and ask him about how do I deal with this with the city? And he tells you, and like he's a weaver. And they're all come in all varieties and shapes. I was in McCook, Nebraska, and McCook is a little town that didn't have enough places to gather. So somebody started a bakery. I'm in Wilkes, North Carolina, which is sort of an Appalachian oak. And there somebody started a distillery. Or there was a young woman who grew up lesbian, and she has a farm. And somebody took a bat to the side of her head because they didn't like lesbians. God. So she moves out to L.A. and she thinks I'm getting the hell out of Wilkes. And she's out in L.A. trying to minister to kids, like so they don't have to go through what she went through. And she realized there are more social workers than there are kids. And she realized that my home is back in Wilkes. And she thought I'm never coming back here. But she came back here, and she's part of the community. And, you know, she's a farm family, so farmers have to look out for each other. They have to help each other. And she's now working with the teenagers of Little Wilkes, North Carolina. We ran into a lady in Florida who was helping kids out after elementary school cross the street. And we asked her, do you have time to volunteer in your neighborhood? And she said, no, I have no time. And we said, well, are you getting paid for this? And she said, no, but in the afternoons, I help the kids cross the street. And then we said, well, what are you doing after this? And she said, well, on Thursdays, I take food to the hospitals. And we said, do you have time to volunteer in your neighborhood? And she says, no, I have no time. And she didn't regard any of this as volunteering. It was just what neighbors do. It was just her definition of how you be a neighbor. And so what we do is we support these people with a little money to make their life a little easier. And then we introduce them to each other because they're all stressed. They're all burnt out. And then we give them speaking assignments. So we have a little speaking agency so they can go around the country and tell what they do and maybe inspire more people to do it. We just try to give them recognition. And it's been tremendously rewarding work while the rest of the country's been divided and angry. I've been surrounded by some of the greatest human beings on earth who are really selfless love of neighborhood. And Braver Angels is a classic weaver organization. I mean, they literally in the business of taking reds and blues and weaving them together. And they're more established and they're bigger than some of these little places that we support. But it's a beautiful one of the most impressive organizations in this world is Braver Angels.
Yes, they really are. I know they've been life changing for me, and I've seen the change that they've made with people. I mean, this last year at the at the convention in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Watching people, watching the way that they were able to interact with people that they may have never interacted with before. It's incredible. But yeah, this organization of yours, David, the Weavers, weaving the social fabric, that just getting people. I love that story about the gal who I'm too busy to volunteer. I'm just too busy volunteering, and just never really understanding, the true good that she's doing with each of the things that she's doing. And she's like, well, I'm not volunteering. This is just what I do. That is such a beautiful story. And if more people really had that, had that thought process these days and really engaged with their neighbors, and instead of this online ecosystem that so many people find themselves stuck in today. I mean, I think that real social engagement versus that faux social engagement brings us back to the days of old, and brings us back and mends that fabric of our nation. David Brooks, this has been an incredible conversation. I'm so very much looking forward to more conversations with you in the future. Your book, How to Know a Person: The Art of Seeing People Deeply and Deeply Being Seen. That is certainly, like I said, I don't want to blow you up too much, man, but this is literally one of the most instrumental books of my lifetime, and I think it's something that is mandatory reading for anybody who wants to better their life. So any parting words, David, for the DTH listeners?
Nope. I really support what you do. You're making the country a better place, and I'm hoping to make it to the Braver Angels convention, the next one. I think it's in late June or something like that. So I'm hoping to get there, and we'll meet in person.
Yes, late June in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I will be there, and I hope to see you there. David Brooks, I'm so grateful for you, man. Thank you very much, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week, saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.